Imagine having so much money that even if the government took half of it away, you would still have more wealth than half the country combined.
It really sounds like some crazy hypothetical thought experiment, right? But that is actually the mathematical reality we are looking at today.
Yeah, welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to unpack this massive stack of economic reports and new legislative proposals surrounding the taxation of ultra-wealthy Americans.
And we are skipping the basics today. We know you follow the economy closely, so we're getting straight into the complex tax loopholes, the historical wealth gap, and this brand new legislation aimed directly at billionaires.
Right, but before we jump into the numbers, we need to set some ground rules.
Yes. Absolutely. Because we are dealing with proposals from politicians like Senator Bernie Sanders, we want to make it crystal clear to you right at the top. We are not endorsing these viewpoints. We aren't taking any political sides here.
Exactly.
Our job today is strictly to unpack the math, explain the mechanics of the proposals, and show you exactly what is in the source material. Nothing more.
Okay, with that out of the way, let's jump right into the news hook. The date is March 2, 2026.
Just recently.
Right. Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Khanna just introduced a massive new bill. It's called the Make Billionaires Pay Their Fair Share Act. And this legislation targets exactly 938 Americans.
Just 938 people.
Yeah. And together, those 938 individuals hold a combined $8.2 trillion.
Which is just a staggering number to wrap your head around.
It really is. So the primary mechanism of this bill is to slap a 5% annual wealth tax on this specific group. The whole goal, to raise $4.4 trillion over the next decade.
And this represents a highly aggressive shift in tax policy. I mean, we are moving away from traditional income taxes and directly targeting accumulated net worth.
Because normally we just tax what you earn in a given year.
Exactly. But to understand why lawmakers drafted this specific legislation right now, we really have to look at the underlying economic data from the past few years.
The wealth gap.
Right. The statistics show an unprecedented concentration of wealth that just exploded recently.
Right.
Get this. Billionaire wealth actually more than doubled since 2019.
Doubled.
More than doubled. That is a 132% growth in just 6 years.
The 132% increase? So wait, while the broader global economy navigated a pandemic, massive supply chain shifts, intense inflation.
The very top bracket saw their net worth absolutely skyrocket.
That is wild. And this isn't just a recent phenomenon triggered by the pandemic, right? The sources show this historical growth gap stretches back decades.
Oh, absolutely. Since 1982, the top 400 richest Americans saw their wealth grow by 6.5% every single year.
6.5%.
Every year.
Sure.
Now, when you compare that to the average American family, their real income grew by only 1.2% per year over that exact same time frame.
That compounding interest creates a massive, massive divergence over 40 years.
It does. The wealth at the top surpassed the growth of the average family by an astronomical margin. It just outpaced everyday workers year after year, decade after decade.
Until we reach the point we are at today.
Right. We've reached a point where this tiny group of 938 people controls wealth equal to 18% of the entire United States annual gross domestic product.
18% of the GDP. Let's put that into perspective for you. 4 decades ago, billionaire wealth equaled just 2% of the U.S. economy.
And today it stands at 18%.
The economic researchers behind these proposals argue that when wealth concentrates this heavily, democracies fundamentally risk turning into oligarchies, because economic power inevitably translates into political power.
And that brings up the core mechanical question of this whole deep dive. How does this actually happen under our current tax code?
Right. How do individuals worth hundreds of billions of dollars manage to pay lower effective tax rates than average wage earners?
Well, the system treats different types of money in fundamentally different ways. The legislation identifies 3 main loopholes that drive this huge disparity.
Okay, let's break them down.
The first, and certainly the most impactful, is tax deferral on unrealized capital gains.
Let's explain the mechanics of that deferral simply. Like, if you work a normal job, you pay taxes on your wages every single year.
Right. The taxes come right out of your paycheck before it even hits your bank account.
Exactly. But billionaires do not build wealth through normal paychecks or W-2 income. They build wealth through holding assets, usually company stock, that just explode in value.
And under the current tax system, an increase in the value of an asset is an unrealized gain.
Unrealized.
Right. You own the stock, the value goes up, but because you haven't actually sold it, You haven't realized the profit. Therefore, you owe absolute zero income tax on that new value.
So they simply hold on to the assets and defer the taxes, sometimes indefinitely.
Yeah.
It's kind of like owning a really valuable baseball card collection.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah, so it makes you rich on paper, but the IRS can't tax you on it until you actually take those cards down to a card shop and sell them for cash.
That is exactly how it works.
But here's the thing that always gets me. They still need money to buy the mega yachts, the sports teams and the mansions.
Right.
If they don't sell the stock, if they don't sell the baseball cards, how do they get the cash to live like billionaires?
This is where the infamous buy, borrow, die strategy comes into play.
Buy, borrow, die.
Yes. They take their unsold stock straight to a major bank and use it as collateral for massive low-interest loans.
So they just borrow against their own wealth.
Exactly. The loan gives them hundreds of millions of dollars in liquid cash to fund their lifestyle. But, and this is the crucial part, because a loan is technically debt, not income, it is completely tax-free.
Wow. So they keep the stock. The stock continues to grow in value, usually at a rate way higher than the interest rate on the loan.
And they avoid the income tax entirely. It's a brilliant, completely legal maneuver under the current code. You avoid the tax hit, but you still get the cash.
Okay, but let's say a billionaire does decide to cash out. Maybe they want to take a company private or just liquidate some holdings, so they finally sell the stock.
Even then, the tax code still gives them a massive discount through the second loophole, preferential tax rates.
Break that down for us.
When you sell an asset you have held for over a year, that profit is taxed at the long-term capital gains rate.
Right.
Now, the top tax rate for ordinary wage and income, the money you make from working a regular job, that tops out at 37%.
37%.
But the top federal tax rate for selling these long-term assets is only 20%.
That is a huge difference. You work a normal job as a doctor or an engineer, you might hit a 37% top rate on a portion of your income. But if you sell $1 billion in tech stock, your rate tops out at just 20%.
Exactly. Now, the original argument for this lower rate was to incentivize investment in the economy.
Sure, to get people to put their money into growing businesses.
Right. But critics point out it heavily favors the ultra-wealthy, whose primary income comes from assets rather than their actual labor.
Which leads us to the third mechanism, the estate loopholes, specifically something called the stepped-up basis.
The stepped-up basis is a really crucial piece of the puzzle here. Let's go back to our billionaire, who hold on to their stock their entire life, utilizing that buy, borrow, die strategy.
Okay.
When they die, they pass those unsold assets on to their heirs. Under current law, the value of those assets is stepped up to the current market value on the exact day they die.
Meaning all that historical growth, the billions of dollars in profit that accumulated over their entire lifetime, is suddenly wiped clean from the IRS ledger.
Wiped completely clean.
Yeah.
If the heirs decide to sell the stock the very next day, they pay absolutely zero capital gains tax on the profit that accrued during the founder's lifetime.
The original tax bill essentially disappears.
Yes. So these three mechanisms, tax deferral, preferential capital gains rates, and the stepped-up basis at death, these are the exact structural targets of the new economic proposals we are looking at.
Okay, so now let's dive into the math of the actual legislative solutions designed to dismantle this system, because the research details two main frameworks for fixing this.
Right. The first framework comes from a highly influential 2021 proposal by two economists from the University of California, Berkeley, Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Zucman.
Okay, Saez and Zucman, what did they propose?
They took a look at the massive wealth boom during the pandemic and proposed a massive one-time tax.
One time.
Just once. Their proposal directly targets those unrealized gains we talked about. They want to treat all that unsold stock as if it were sold today, taxing it at a combined rate of 43.4%.
43.4%. How does it get that high?
It breaks down to restoring the top individual rate to 39.6% and adding a 3.8% net investment income tax.
Okay, but if they treat unsold stock as if it were sold today, that triggers a monumental tax bill all at once. How could anyone, even a billionaire, liquidate enough cash to pay that without flooding the market with stock and basically crashing the economy?
It's a valid concern, and the Berkeley economists actually accounted for that market risk. This single one-time event would raise $1 trillion from fewer than 1,000 people.
$1 trillion.
Yeah, but to make it manageable and prevent a market fire sale, the plan allows the billionaires to pay the tax bill in installments over a 10-year period.
Okay, so it spreads out the impact.
Right. It effectively acts as a massive reset button on the wealth accumulated over the past few decades.
Got it. So that 2021 idea kind of laid the intellectual groundwork. But the new legislation from March 2026, the Sanders and Khanna bill, it takes a different, even bolder approach, right?
It does. Instead of a one-time reset, they propose a recurring 5% annual wealth tax.
The annual.
Every single year. And it targets anyone with a net worth over $1 billion.
That is a profound shift. It means the IRS isn't just looking at what you earned or sold this year. They are looking at a snapshot of everything you own, minus your debts, and taking 5% of the total value over that billion-dollar threshold every single year.
Let's look at the real-world math for this 5% tax based on current valuations. Take Elon Musk.
All right.
With a net worth of $833 billion, this plan would hit him with a $42 billion tax bill in the very first year.
$42 billion in year one. What about the other top guys?
Well, Mark Zuckerberg, currently holding a net worth of $220 billion, he would owe $11 billion.
And Jeff Bezos.
Worth $218 billion, he would also owe approximately $11 billion.
And remember, this isn't a one-time payment. This happens annually.
Yes, and the long-term math of a recurring 5% tax is probably the most fascinating aspect of this whole policy. The researchers point out a really staggering compounding effect.
How so?
If you apply a 5% tax to a fortune every year, mathematically, it outpaces normal market growth and effectively cuts a billionaire's wealth in half after 15 years.
Cut in half. Just a consistent 5% tax erodes the principal heavily over a decade and a half.
Exactly. We can look at a specific simulation run by the economists in the sources. They analyzed the top 10 richest Americans today who currently hold a combined $2.5 trillion.
$2.5 trillion.
Right. If this 5% wealth tax had been enacted back in 1980, those same top 10 individuals would only be worth $888 billion today.
That is a staggering reduction, from over $2.5 trillion down to $888 billion. It highlights exactly how the tax systematically dismantles high-level wealth concentration over time.
And the explicit goal of the legislation goes beyond just raising revenue. The authors argue that aggressively breaking up that wealth concentration is a structural necessity for the health of the broader economy.
Okay, so we just talked about extracting $4.4 trillion out of billionaire portfolios over the next decade.
A lot of money.
Right. So the natural question for you, the listener, is what happens to that capital? Where does the money actually go?
It doesn't just disappear into a vault.
Exactly. The 2026 legislation doesn't just put this into a general fund. It outlines a highly specific list of social programs that this $4.4 trillion would finance.
And this is where we really see the macroeconomic strategy. The goal is to take illiquid capital tied up in stock portfolios and inject it directly into the working and middle-class economy.
Banking on the multiplier effect. Right?
Yes, the idea that lower and middle-income families spend money immediately, which stimulates broader economic growth.
Let's run through the specific allocations because the scope here is massive. First is direct cash assistance. The bill guarantees a $3,000 direct payment to every single person living in a household that makes $150,000 or less.
So if you have a family of 4.
That equals a $12,000 direct payment injected straight into your household budget in the first year alone.
Wow. Next, they allocate a massive portion to healthcare infrastructure. The legislation uses the funds to reverse $1.1 trillion in previous cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act.
Which has a huge human impact.
Absolutely. The epidemiological projections in the text claim that fully funding these programs and reversing those cuts will save an estimated 50,000 lives by increasing access to preventative care.
50,000 lives saved.
Furthermore, the plan expands traditional Medicare so that it comprehensively covers dental, vision, and hearing for seniors.
Then the bill moves to housing and childcare, which are two of the absolute largest pressure points for the modern workforce.
Huge issues right now.
Yeah. The legislation funds the building, rehabilitating, and preserving of 7 million affordable homes, and it fundamentally restructures the childcare system by capping costs.
How does the cap work?
It ensures that no family pays more than 7% of their total income on childcare.
The economic rationale behind that 7% childcare cap is critical.
A pretty shocking
by drastically
realization when you
lowering
actually
the
look
cost
at the
of
math.
childcare.
Right. Well,
You remove
imagine for a
one of
second
the
that you have a
primary
savings account.
barriers
Keeping
and
parents,
particularly women,
you
out
swore
of
to
the
your
workforce.
family, hand over heart,
It is strictly designed
that
to
this
boost
money was
overall
strictly
labor
for
force
fixing a
participation.
leaking roof.
It makes a lot of sense.
You said, finally,
If
the
we
bill
don't fix this
addresses
roof,
education. it mandates that every
It's an
public school
existential
teacher in the
crisis for the
country
House.
receives a
It's the Save the
minimum
House
salary
fund.
of $60,000
But then, your car
a year.
breaks down.
A
you spend a little too much
$60,000
on
minimum
groceries,
base
you've
for
got bills
teachers
piling
across
up.
the board.
So what do you do?
7
You raid the
million
roof fund.
new or rehabilitated
that money,
homes,
pay off your credit
expanded
cards, and tell
Medicare
your
covering
family, hey,
vision
don't
and
worry, we'll
dental,
fix the
and
roof later.
thousands of
Right.
dollars in
And in
direct
this
cash
scenario,
checks.
the
It's
roof is
ambitious.
the planet.
That is an
or at least
unprecedented level
Maryland's
of
climate
social
goals.
infrastructure.
And
And
the
it is
car is a
funded
massive,
entirely by
self-inflicted
taxing the unsold assets of just
$1.5 billion
938 people.
state
Now,
budget.
you might
deficit.
assume
A
that
completely
tracking down
avoidable
these
deficit, I
assets
might
and
add.
creating a whole
Welcome
new
to the deep
taxation
dive.
paradigm
Today
would be an
we're exploring
administrative
a
nightmare
classic
for the
case
Internal
of
Revenue
fiscal
Service.
sleight of
Sure,
hand
auditing
coming out of
billionaires sounds
Annapolis.
incredibly complex.
We are looking at
But
the
proponents
Strategic
of the
Energy
plan
Investment
actually
Fund.
argue the exact opposite.
SAFE.
They point out that
It's a
the
huge
IRS
pot of money
already
meant
possesses
to
the
save the
infrastructure
environment,
to handle
but it's
thousands
turning
of
into a hidden
complex,
tax
illiquid
on every
asset
single person
valuations
paying in
through
a
the
electric
existing
bill
estate
in
tax
Maryland.
system.
Oh,
It really
because
is.
the
It's become the
scope
center
of
of
this
a
new
huge
tax is
political
incredibly
fight.
narrow.
You've got
we
a
aren't
Democratic
talking about
governor,
auditing
frustrated
millions of small
environmentalists
business
making
owners.
some very
The
awkward
IRS only has to
compromises,
focus its audit
and conservative
resources on a
critics
list
who are
of fewer
rightly
than
calling this whole
1,000
thing a shell game.
individuals.
A shell
Exactly.
game.
And
And
when you
the
look at the
Economist
documents
actually
we have
ran
today,
the models,
reports,
factoring in
budget
human
proposals,
behavior.
critiques
They
from Senate
anticipate
Republicans,
intense legal
it is
challenges
really hard to
and
unsee it.
aggressive
Our
tax
mission for this
avoidance
deep dive is
strategies.
simple.
Of course.
Follow the money.
Billionaires will
Always
hire
follow the
armies
money.
of lawyers.
We are going to see
Right, so the
how
models
a fund
assume a 10%
designed to fight
evasion rate,
climate
Right.
change
meaning they
is
expect
being used to
billionaires
plug
to
holes in the
successfully
state
hide
budget.
or legally
And we'll
shield
dig into the argument
about
that
10%
this isn't
of
found
their
money at
targeted
all.
wealth.
Okay,
This is
so they built
essentially
that
a
into the
backdoor
math.
tax
They
on
did.
families.
And yet,
Let's get
even
right
with
into
that
it.
10%
The
evasion
Strategic
built into
Energy
the math,
Investment Fund.
the
It sounds
tax
very
still comfortably
official, very
raises the
important.
$4.4
What does it
trillion
actually do?
required
Well,
to fund
on
the
paper,
entire slate
it is
of
the
public
state's
programs.
green
That
piggy
really
bank.
perfectly
The SIF
distills
is
the
managed
core
by the
tension
Maryland
we're seeing in the
Energy
legislative
Administration.
text
Its
today.
whole stated purpose
On
is
one
to
side of the
reduce
ledger,
energy
you
bills,
have a historic
cut
concentration
waste,
of
and
capital.
fund renewable
You have
energy.
938
Like solar panels and
individuals
efficiency upgrades.
holding $8.2
Exactly.
trillion.
But here is the real aha
largely
moment of the
shielded from
story.
annual taxation through
Where
deferral
does the money
strategies and
actually
borrowing.
come
Right.
from?
And on the other
Because
side,
they aren't just
you have a
taxing you
massive
directly
legislative
for it.
push
No,
to
and that's why
systematically
politicians
tax
absolutely love
those
it. It feels
unsold
free.
assets,
So about 40%
that
comes
vast
from regional
reservoir of
carbon
paper
auctions.
wealth to
But
finance
the big
trillions
chunk,
of
the one
dollars in
growing like
direct
crazy,
public investments.
comes from something called
It represents a
alternative
fundamental
compliance
paradigm
payments,
shift,
or
in how the
ACPs,
federal government
Which is just a
defines and
fancy
targets
government term for a
taxable
fine.
capacity.
Right. It's a fine
You're
for
moving
failure.
away from
Let
a
me break
system
it
that
down.
taxes the
Maryland
money
law
citizens earn
forces
through
utility
labor,
companies to
and
buy
moving
a
towards
certain
system
amount
that
of
actively
green
taxes
energy.
the
They
total
have to prove
value
they're
of
using
what the
renewables.
wealthiest citizens
But if they
own.
can't find
Well,
that
we
green
have
energy,
covered
or if it's
the
just way too
complex
expensive on the
loopholes,
market,
the
Which it
mathematical
usually is.
simulations
yeah,
of a
the state gives
5%
them an
wealth
escape
tax,
hatch.
and the massive
utility
social
can just
programs
pay
that
a fee
capital
directly
could
to the
theoretically
state
fund.
instead.
But as
That
we
fee
wrap
is
up,
the
we always
ACP.
like to leave you with
And
a
here's the
broader
kicker.
concept to chew on.
Utilities
Yes.
are
And there is a
increasingly
significant
just paying the
systemic
fine
risk
because
hidden
it's
within
cheaper
the
than actually
administrative
buying
reality
the
of this
green
legislation.
energy.
Wait, so
The documents
the climate
outline,
fund is
using
getting
lists like the Forbes
incredibly
400
rich.
and market valuations to help the IRS audit these
the
massive
green energy
fortunes.
mandates are failing.
They want to fund
Precisely. It
concrete,
is a
essential
completely
social
perverse
programs like
incentive.
teacher salaries
The government made
and
the
Medicaid
mandates so
based on
aggressive
the
and the
estimated
market is so
value of
distorted
unsold
that
corporate
power
stock.
companies are just writing
It
checks
raises
to
a
the state
glaring
instead of going
macroeconomic
green.
question.
And the stats on
If
this
we
are
start
just
tying the
staggering.
federal budget
are.
so heavily to
In
estimated
2022,
unsold stock
this revenue
values,
was $77
what happens to the
million.
government's ability
By
to fund those
2025,
critical
it jumped to
programs?
$365
If the stock market experiences a
million.
severe crash,
Wow. From
and all those paper
77 million
billions
to
simply
365
evaporate
million in
overnight.
3 years.
Wow.
Right, so now the
A
state has
massive
this
vulnerability to mull
massive
over.
accidental
Tying the social
pot of
safety
gold.
net to the
It's
volatility of the
supposedly for
stock
green
market
projects.
really changes the
But
entire
remember, that
equation.
money
It
didn't
really
just
does.
fall out of the
Thank
sky.
you for
The
joining
utility
us on this
companies
deep
paid
dive
those
into the
fines.
taxation of the
And do you think those
ultra-wealthy.
massive
Keep
corporations
questioning
just
the
ate that
mechanics
cost
behind the
out of the goodness
headlines,
of their
and we will
hearts?
catch you next
Oh,
time.
absolutely